success. I think we are seeing some positive signs of rebalancing in our economy. Recently, I was at the big investment BP are making in the North Sea, the opening of the new Airbus factory at Broughton in Wales. If you look across our auto industry, whether it is Nissan or Toyota or Jaguar Land Rover, all these companies are expanding and bringing more of their production and supply chain onshore. There's a huge amount more to do, but we have to accept we start from a low base, as sadly manufacturing production declined so much over the last decade.
Karen Lumley.
Would the Prime Minister join with me in welcoming nearly £1 million that has been received in Redditch with a pupil premium? And would he persuade the Secretary of State for Education to push with a national funding formula as soon as possible?
Well, discussions about a national funding formula are ongoing. It is a difficult issue to resolve because of the historic patterns of differences of funding around the country. I do think the pupil premium is a major step forward. It's going to be up to £2.6 billion by the end of this Parliament. In that IFS report, it actually says we have made spending on education much more progressive by the action that we've taken. We've taken difficult decisions, but at the heart of it was a decision to protect the schools budget and per pupil funding, and on top of that to add the pupil premium to make sure that we're looking after the less well off in our country.
Gloria De Piero.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, a leaked Downing Street report said, and I quote, "We know from a range of polls that women are significantly more negative about the government than men." Why does the Prime Minister think this is?
Are making difficult spending decisions, and when you have a difficult economic situation and household budgets are under huge pressure from things like petrol prices and food prices and inflation, clearly that impacts women, and the government wants to do everything it can to help women. That is why we've listed 1 million people out of tax, the majority of whom are women. That's why we're putting much more money and time into the free nursery education for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. That's why for the first time we've agreed that women working less than 16 hours a week will get childcare. And we don't just care about this issue at home. Because of what we're doing in international aid, we're going to be saving over 50,000 women in childbirth around the world.
Nadine Dorries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IPC have made one decision, which is to grant a planning permission for the American waste giant company, Covanta, for 650,000 tonnes incinerator in mid-Bedfordshire. Thousands of people in Bedfordshire responded to the consultation process saying they do not want this. In the small print of the decision, it says that this decision is subject to special parliamentary procedure. Will the Prime Minister please let the people of Bedfordshire know that this government is not like the previous government, that we listen to local concerns and that we will ensure that this monstrous, rubbish-guzzling, atmosphere-polluting incinerator will not be imposed upon the people of Bedfordshire?
My honourable friend makes an important point. There are difficult planning decisions that have to be made, but what this government has done is actually made sure that the planning system is more democratic and does report into Parliament, and ministers have to take decisions and be accountable. I can't speak for how those ministers have to make those decisions. They have to make them in their own way, but we've ended the idea of the vast quango with absolutely no accountability, as she rightly says.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
The Prime Minister has warned African countries that unless they improve gay rights, he will cut their aid. Yet in many African countries where we pour in millions of pounds of aid, Christians face great persecution, destruction of churches, lives and property. Here in the UK, if you display a Bible verse on the wall of a cafe, you face prosecution. Was Anne Widdecombe right when she said that in the 21st century, hedgehogs have more rights than Christians?
Anne Widdecombe is often right, not always right, but often right. I do think the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point, and the way we judge our aid decisions is to look at human rights across the piece, and that does mean how people are treating Christians, and also the appalling behaviour that some African countries treat to people who are gay.
Stephen Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Eastbourne, we recruited recently 181 apprentices in 100 days. My local training provider, Sussex Downs, tells me that 91% of their hospitality apprentices go into full-time jobs. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that apprentices work, and in Eastbourne they work particularly well?
I'm happy to agree with my honourable friend about this. We did find funding for an extra 50,000 apprenticeships last year and actually achieved almost, I think, double that because of the enthusiasm there is amongst the business community and amongst young people to take on these apprenticeships. We're now running at about 360,000 a year and hope to achieve about 250,000 more apprentices than were planned under the last government. I think it's a really important development in our country. We want to make sure that the apprenticeship schemes are really aimed at young people who need work and also aimed at the higher level, people going on to get degree-equivalent qualifications. So it's not seen as a second best. For many people, it's the right career path. And there are companies in Britain, like Rolls-Royce, where many of the people on the board started with an apprenticeship.
David Hanson.
On reflection, is now the right time for the Prime Minister to scrap Labour's indeterminate sentences for public protection, as the Justice Secretary wants to do, introduced to save dangerous, violent criminals from damaging British public? Will he accept from me that it should be not about prison places, but should be about the protection of the public?
Yeah. Well, my right honourable friend will be making an announcement about this shortly, but I think what he will find is actually we're going to be replacing a failed system that doesn't work, the public don't understand, with tough, determinant sentences. People have always wanted to know that when you get sent to prison for a serious offence, you don't, as currently, get let out halfway through. We'll be putting an end to that scandal, and I expect it to have widespread support.
Mary MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If women were to start businesses at the same rate as men, we would have 150,000 more businesses per year in this country. And I have some exceptional entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs in my constituency, such as Kath Kidston. What can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, do to encourage more female entrepreneurs to create growth and jobs for the country?
I think there are a lot of things that government can do, and in the last budget there were a series of steps, like the enterprise finance schemes that we've established, like the changes to capital gains tax. But I think the biggest change is a change in culture, of actually encouraging people to take that first step and supporting them along the way as they go.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, this House, to its great credit, supported unanimously full transparency from government of all documents relating to the Hillsborough disaster. Will he now join me in calling on the South Yorkshire Police to follow the example of the Honourable Member for Sheffield South East and commit to the exact same openness and ensure the Hillsborough Independent Panel has unredacted access to all papers?
I will certainly look at the issue that she raises. I'm not fully aware of the situation with regards to the police papers, so I don't want to give her a flip answer across the dispatch box. I think the government has done what it should in terms of the Cabinet papers, but I'm very happy to look at the point that she raises and come back to her.
Mr. Edward Timpson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend join me in praising all those adopters and foster carers in Crewe and Nantwich and elsewhere for the fantastic work that they do to encourage others to come forward to foster and adopt, and to recognise during National Care Leavers Week we can do much more to provide care leavers with the sustained and endurable support that they often need and always deserve.
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend, and he speaks from great experiences. His own parents, I think, actually helped to foster around 90 children over the last few decades, and I think it's a magnificent example. As I said in my party conference speech, I think we really need to attack every aspect of this issue. It is a national scandal that there are 3,660 children in the care system under the age of 1, although last year I think there were only 60 adoptions of those children. We've got to do a lot better. Part of it's about bureaucracy, part of it is about culture, but a lot of it is about encouraging good foster parents and adoptive parents to come forward and give them security in the knowledge that actually the process won't be as bad as it is now. So thoroughgoing reform is required. My honourable friend, the Children's Minister, is leading this work, and I'm confident we can make some real breakthroughs in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the 11th of August, the Prime Minister told this House that there would be a report to Parliament on cross-government activity relating to gangs. Where is that report? When will we see it?
But we are working intensively right across Whitehall on the gang issue, because I think in the past, frankly, this was something that was dealt with in the Home Office, but there wasn't the same input from other departments. So we're doing exactly that, and when we're ready for a report to Parliament, we'll make it.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I worked in the private sector, I benefited from statutory maternity leave. Can the Prime Minister remind the House of how this government is making work more flexible and more family-friendly?
How typical of the party opposite. If someone talks about the private sector or job creation, all they've got is a lack of respect and sneering.